Welcome to the Lighthouse Financial Advisors Money Over 50 podcast with Dallas Davison and Michael Hogue. This information is general in nature and does not take into account your objectives, financial situation, or needs. Therefore, you should consider whether the information is appropriate for you and your personal circumstances. If you require personal advice, please contact Lighthouse Financial Advisors. Here are your hosts, Dallas Davison and Michael Hogue.
Welcome to Money Over 50. I'm Michael Hogue here with Dallas Davison. Dallas, today we're going to have a look at a case study for a stereotypical client of ours. It's one of your clients.
It is.
That you've had success with.
Amazingly, their names are John and Jane Smith. They aren't really. One of these days we'll actually get a client named John and Jane Smith, and then we'll have to change how we explain all those things.
Unbelievably, just the other day, I was having a first meeting with some prospective clients with last name Murphy, and we actually looked at the trade-off of them either keeping a rental property or selling it, and to sell it worked out better for them. And they said, "What's the potential downside?" I said, remarkably enough, it's Murphy's Law. So I feel really strange telling you this, but I mean, it is. But it's Murphy's Law because if you do it, obviously there is potential downside in that if the property prices kept going up and up and up, then they could miss out. So you can only. Digressing here, but you can only act on what you think is going to happen, and that's fundamentals. So
something a bit different today, a case study of, because obviously we talk very conceptually in a lot of these podcasts about different ideas and concepts and the bigger picture. So what I just wanted to quickly do is go through a real life example of someone who has come in and met with us, and the sort of the path that they've taken, or the journey that they've gone through over their time with us. So, as I say, these guys, let's say John and Jane Smith, they first came and met with us in November of 2014. So they were, at that time, John was working in the railway and was age 60, and was on about $95,000 a year. And his wife was not working; she'd stayed home and raised the kids. And their plan was that they wanted to. It was two things that they really wanted to do. Number one was to retire in 4 years' time and never run out of money. And a big part of their other goals were that they wanted to be able to continue to grow their retirement savings and pass on some money to their kids when they passed away. So that was important to them, and that was at the very start. A conversation we have with all of our clients is about that trade-off of are you happy to run out of money in retirement or close to it, or do you want money left over to go to your kids? So these guys were in a really good position, but given that they wanted to, number one, not run out of money in retirement, but also make sure that they had enough to continue to grow that balance in retirement, they had, when they came in, they had about $700,000 in superannuation, $120,000 saved into a term deposit, and about $80,000 worth of direct shares in CBA. So they had total, I guess, what we would call retirement savings of $900,000. Now they had their house paid off as well, and that's something that we look at, is that when we talk about retirement savings, it's really only what can you spend. And so for these guys, their plan was to stay in. They'd been in their house for many years. They didn't have any plans to move, and so you kind of have to exclude the value of your house from that perspective of what have you actually got to live on and draw income from in retirement. So there was the two main things, and we talk about this with most people, whether you are 4 years or 10 years out from retirement. There's a couple of easier things that you can try and pick up. They'd actually recently met with Q Super, and they'd recently met with a Q Super financial advisor, and they'd got the plan from them. Now, they hadn't really had the in-depth discussions that we generally have with our clients about the trade-off between higher growth and higher volatility assets. And so they were invested probably a bit too conservatively, given given their goals, which were to grow their retirement savings as much as possible over the long term. So, and that's I guess the danger, and we talk about this a lot. With if you're meeting with an advisor and they don't seem to, there's very much a cookie cutter approach by the sounds of it that these guys got, which was, you're of this age, you're this far out from retirement, you need to be invested in this pre-mixed investment strategy.
And oftentimes, in fact, nearly all the time, we find that the advisor doesn't have any context around that. So they're making a blanket approach at the led by the ages of the clients and the proximity to retirement. Without actually taking a step back and actually looking at what rate of return needs to be achieved for those people to never run out of money, and to achieve the goals that you mentioned before. So these particular people you mentioned weren't happy to run out of money.
No,
even 30 years deep into their retirement.
That's right.
They weren't happy to run out of money. They wanted to leave money.
They must be much nicer than my parents. My parents always say to me, "We want to run out of money on the day we die." So these guys are saying, "No, we don't want. We want to give our kids some money when we pass away." So that's a part of it. That initial discussion is, and we've talked about this before, about when people ask us, what should we invest into? That really has to be driven by that piece of the puzzle, which is how do we invest our retirement savings? How do we invest our superannuation balance? That has to be driven by your goals and what you're looking to achieve over the long term. You can't back your way into that and say, oh, well, you're a 60 and 62-year-old couple. This is how you should be invested, because it is different for everyone depending on what you're looking to achieve. But these guys, to continue on, they're really good savers as well, obviously, given that they've been able to pay off the house and build up some cash, as well as build up a significant super balance. So what we did for these guys was two things: was invested their superannuation a bit more aggressively, given that they had a few years still to go in their working life, and that they were planning on growing that over the next 30 years. The second part of it was contributions into super. So picking up some tax savings by making before tax contributions into super. At this point in time, that limit was $35,000 a year and not $25,000 as it is now. So that made it a bit easier. So that was the thing we did there, was to max out the before tax contributions they could make to super using their spare cash flow. Now, at that point in time, there was also a couple of other little lurks and perks that we could pick up. They could move their superannuation into a tax-free transition to retirement pension. So we picked up a bit of a saving on the earnings tax of the money within their super as well. That loophole has since been shut, but it was a handy little one to boost that as well. So they continued on their sort of merry way doing that for about 18 months. So as I said, their plan was to retire in 4 years. They were maxing out their super contributions and having that money working for them as hard as possible. 18 months into this 4-year plan, and this is what we find again and again, is people come in and everyone's got a rough outline of where they want to be, but life happens and things get in the way.
It's amazing how people come in and say, you wouldn't believe what's happened, and they think it's unique, and when you look at it, you see different scenarios for different people, but almost everyone's situation changes.
That's right. And the one that I always look at with that is when people come in and say, this is what we're going to do for the next 5-10 years, nothing's going to change. You go, well, look back 5 or 10 years. What's changed in your life over that time? So, and that's why we work with people on an ongoing basis, is that the planning is not a set and forget thing. It's not, you go and do this for the next 4 years. Things are constantly changing, both in terms of their situation and then also, like I said, legislation. There were some of those rules that have since changed. So 18 months into this 4-year plan, these guys got a really good surprise, which was that their employer was offering a round of redundancies. And so given that they'd been an employee for so long, they were offered a redundancy, a net payment of just over $200,000. And so we had a really good conversation at that point in time about it was I think actually a bit scary for these guys to be able to they'd been an employee there for 42 years at that point in time.
Yep.
And it was a really big change to make, and so it took quite a while just to go through the nuts and bolts of, if you take this redundancy, what position does that put you in? Does that allow you to meet all your goals, 2.5 years early? So we did all the calculations. At that point in time, their superannuation had grown from 700,000 up to just under 800,000 just in 18 months through, like we said, a combination of their hard work and the good work behind the scenes of that super working hard for them.
Yep.
So as well as that, they'd saved an additional $30,000, and so to their term deposit, and obviously with the redundancy, that lump sum of $200,000, that got them up to total retirement savings of just over $1.2 million.
Yep.
And so, because they didn't plan to live in a fairly, we joke about, everyone always, no one ever wants to live an extravagant lifestyle, but these guys were spending about $52,000 a year.
Yep.
And that was based on, as we always do with their clients, it wasn't based on what they said they were going to spend. I'd based on this is what they were actually spending day to day.
Yep, which is important.
Yeah, and so we looked at that, and as a rule of thumb, you normally want about 20 times your first year's income in retirement. So if they wanted $50,000 a year, they need at least $1 million to be able to safely never run out of money. So because with these guys, they were wanting to continue to grow that throughout their retirement, we wanted to be a bit above that. So I said, okay, well, if we take this redundancy, you'll be over that $1.2 million mark. That should be plenty of margin of safety to make sure that you can draw all the income you need and continue to grow that. Now, at that point in time, the other thing we looked at was a change to their investment strategy, or to how they've got the options that they were invested into within their super account. So because they're obviously now drawing income from that, rather than all of that money just being able to work and grow for the long term, they were actually going to need to draw $1,000 a week out of that account.
Yep.
So we looked at a figure of, again, it was a conversation that we went through in a fair bit of detail, the trade-off between you could have more money in cash and probably feel safer and feel more secure about how that money's invested, but you've got less money that's then growing for you over the long term. So for these guys, given the position they were in, they could afford to have a fair bit of money in cash, and so we worked out that they wanted to have 5 years worth of living expenses in cash. So in their case, that was about $250,000. For a lot of people that are at retirement, they really can't afford to have that much money in cash, which is sort of counterintuitive for most people, I think.
Yeah, look, it is. I mean, I always say that the day that you stop work, your money has to go to work for you.
Yeah.
And depending on what your balance is, that money may have to work harder than other people.
Yep.
So in these people's situation, because the living expenses were a little bit less than the average, and they had a bit more in balance than they would normally require by your 20 times rule of thumb multiple, or our 20 times rule of thumb multiple, they could afford to have a little bit more there in cash reserves. A lot of people can't. I mean, when you explain that to people, you say, okay, well, you can have more in cash, but that's a trade-off then. That's a lower return.
Yes.
And what that means is that you need to dial back, the $50,000 that you're going to spend to $40,000. We really don't want to do that. So I mean, it's a process then of going through and working it out, tailor making it for each individual.
That's a great point. As we said, is that's not a conversation of the advisor sitting down, laying down commandments of this is how you must invest your money.
No.
That's how we really see that is a trade-off discussion. And it's like for these guys, it's their money. They have done the work required to build that up, and they need to live on that for the next 30 years. And they need to be comfortable with the decisions that they're making around what are the trade-offs that they're willing to make. So, as I say, it becomes easier when as you're saying, if your living expenses are a bit less than average and your retirement savings are a bit higher than average, it becomes easy because you can afford to trade off a few things. So the other thing that we did obviously at that point in time was that we moved all of their superannuation into an account-based pension, so that they were able to So the first thing we did was actually contribute all of the money outside of superannuation in their term deposit, contributed that into their super account, and then moved all of that money into an account-based pension, which has a 0% earnings tax rate. So that was we were then able to achieve one of our overarching goals for all of our clients is never pay another dollar of tax ever again after you retired.
Yes.
So at the point they retired, we were able to meet that goal of ours. So,
and it really, I mean, to put that into, I guess an easy to use example for podcasting purposes, by moving to 0% tax from superannuation, which is a 15% tax rate on the earnings, so the rate of return. It for most people bumps up their after-tax rate of return by about 1%. Which is significant. Because on that balance, we're talking about $10,000 to $12,000 a year of extra return, or tax savings, effectively $10,000 to $12,000 a year of tax savings. So the first, 1/5 of their annual living expenses is paid for by their tax savings.
That's right, and that's especially for most people, none of their goals consists of continue to give money to the ATO.
So, no, I've never met anyone that's told me that.
I'm sure they're out there, but we just don't meet them.
Yeah.
So exactly right. For these guys, that tax saving every year was a big boost in their ability to draw the income they needed, and they obviously were drawing less than their rate of return on that. So that was just continuing that $10,000 to $12,000 a year of tax savings. That's continuing to compound out over time. So over their whole retirement, that's going to make a huge difference. So that was March 2016 that they sort of started retirement. Now, the next major change for them was about a year later, in April 2017. So they'd been retired for a year. They were quite happy. There was no plans to go back to work or do anything like that. At that point in time, there was new legislation coming in. The major one was about limits of ability to get money back into super. And so at that point in time, we did what we call a recontribution strategy. So we recorded a podcast just recently about this, about minimising your 17% inheritance tax. So for these guys, as we said, a big part of their goals was money going to their kids. And so what we actually did at that point in time was we took $540,000 out of their pension account and recontributed it back into a superannuation account and moved it back into a pension account, which sounds a bit involved and a bit pointless.
You robbed Peter to pay Paul to pay Peter back?
Exactly. But essentially what we did there was, by doing that, instead of when they passed away and that money went to their kids, instead of their kids having to pay 17% tax on that money, that will go to them completely tax-free. So that's about a $90,000 tax saving.
Yes. Yeah. So what you're referring to here, the often overlooked taxable taxed component and the tax-free component. And again, we won't go into
if you're interested, there is
detail here because it's very, very hard to convey over a podcast. But just better.
Just better.
We'll wrap it up. It's just better.
It's just better. And as you say, it is often overlooked because it's something that you won't see the benefit of that for, hopefully in their case, one of them will live for another 20, 30 years. So that will only be of benefit to them when that money is passed on to their adult children. And so you go, these are the sorts of things that if you're always looking at things with a long-term view of knowing what are your goals, what are you trying to achieve, what are you focused on, there are some changes that you can make now that you might not see the benefit of that for 20 or 30 years, but that's going to be a big difference, obviously. The other one that they could do at that point in time was that they were able to access a healthcare card, which was sort of surprising because they had far too much in assets to get any settling age pension. But we were able to have a look and work out that they could still get a healthcare card, which was a big benefit for them, particularly as they start to get older.
Look, it is a great benefit, and it's again one of those things that's overlooked. So the assumption is that I have to qualify for $1 of age pension. I hear that phrase a lot. I need to qualify for $1 of age pension. In their situation, obviously assets far too high to qualify for even $1 of age pension under the assets test. However, the healthcare card is income tested.
Yep.
And
it's relatively high income.
And it's relatively high income limits.
Yep.
And there's a trick to the amount of income that you take from your account-based pension, or your superannuation in retirement, doesn't fully count as income. So if I'm taking $50,000, nowhere near that $50,000 counts as income towards that healthcare card. Now, the other thing I'll just touch on there, Dallas, where we really differentiate ourselves from, we feel it, from our competitors, we have an extraordinary asset in this office called Kylie Hadfield, and she's otherwise known as our Director of Financial Doing.
Yep.
So Kylie, when it comes time to apply for our clients' healthcare cards and things like that, because of MyGov now, Kylie actually books a meeting with our clients and actually sits down with them and completes the application.
That's right.
Over MyGov for their healthcare card and age pension and things like that.
And then over time, any amendments to that, anything like that, she's can take charge of that. Which that's another one of the things that you never hear people say. You never hear anyone say they want to keep paying more tax, and you never hear anyone say they're really looking forward to dealing with Centrelink.
That's right.
So that's the position that they were in. So that was kind of a year after retirement. So that's I guess another one that we see is that even after retirement, people tend to see retirement as this static thing of I get to this point in time and then I just draw an income out. Now, what I haven't really got into is over these years we've continued to talk about particularly the investment strategy of how these guys have their pension accounts invested, how much in cash, how much in growth assets, and not just how much do we invest now, but also a plan for when things go wrong. So when we have another drop of 30-40% in company values, we know that's going to come at some stage over the next 30 years of their retirement. So what we've worked on a lot is what we call lifeboat drills, where we're basically going, we know that at some stage, if we're in this long enough, this is going to happen. Where are we going to draw our income from? How long can we draw it from there? When do we switch that from your cash to your growth assets? When do we then rebalance and put you back invested in the same way you were? So there's a lot of moving pieces in that. And I think one of the big things for our clients in retirement with their peace of mind is just knowing that there is a plan is a really helpful thing, because regardless of what markets do over their time, they know that there is a plan. We know what's going to happen. We know what that is. And it also minimises the chance of them making a big mistake in retirement or panicking or doing anything like that, because they go, we already know what we're going to do.
Yep.
So that was April 2017. As I said, since then we've made some minor changes to their investment strategy and put in place a few of those sorts of plans. Now, I'll fast forward to our last progress meeting, which we're still meeting with these guys every 6 months as part of our sort of standard process. So in November 2019, they had total retirement savings through their pension accounts of $1,482,000. So just a shade under 1.5 million.
Yep.
So obviously that's a big jump up from 5 years ago when they first came in with 900,000.
Yep.
Now, in addition to that, they've also drawn income out of these pension accounts of $238,000 over that time frame.
Yep.
So when you combine what they've drawn out with what's still left over, they've basically drawn income and still got a super balance left. That combined balance is just over $1.7 million. So that's just the dollars and cents in terms of the difference that we've been able to make over 5 years has been a growth from $900,000 in retirement savings to being able to safely retire a couple of years earlier than they expected, draw all the income out they need, and still be left with more than enough money to be able to meet all their goals moving forward.
Now, excuse me. What's interesting about that as well is had they been invested really, really conservatively, which is the assumption as people approach retirement.
Yeah.
They would be sitting here now with somewhere in the vicinity of only about $1 million.
Yep.
I'm guessing.
Yep.
Quickly doing the math.
Yeah.
Because the returns, we've looked at this in another podcast. Conservative funds have returned somewhere between the 3 to 4% per annum.
Yep.
Over the last 5 years.
Yeah.
And certainly with what they started with and what they've drawn as income, they would have just a shy over $1 million and would be on the back foot straight away.
Yes,
because
that's right.
they'd be heading backwards.
Yeah.
In terms of what their balances are, as opposed to have continuing to grow in their retirement, despite the fact that they've drawn total income over that period of time of $238,000.
So, and that's, I think, we've talked about that at length. That it seems, I guess most people have the attitude of, when I get to retirement, then I start to spend down my super balance or my pension account. But as we've said, that probably worked many years ago when you retired at 65 and then you passed away at 70 and you had 5 years that you had to draw an income from. For these guys, hopefully, they're in really good health. They take care of themselves. Yeah. One of them is on average going to be around for 30 years. So we need this. Not only do we need to not chew into that balance too much, we actually need that balance to continue to grow in these early years of retirement.
Absolutely, it's a new challenge compared to generations gone by.
Yeah,
and the glass is certainly
full.
more than half full.
Yeah.
Because the alternative, when the age pension was introduced, the average age of death for a male was something like 67.
Yes.
And you had a few little savings as you entered retirement. You retired at 65.
Yep.
On average, you lived for 2 years.
Yep. You got the full age pension. Yep.
You depleted your savings somewhat.
Yep.
The challenge is certainly different these days.
Yes, that's right.
And it's always funny when we have clients that are say 60 now and they talk about they'll be gone by the time they won't live beyond 75 and their parents are still alive. Their parents are 90 or 95.
Yeah, still keeping
and still going strong. So
and then I think the point you make there is that it's a whole new challenge, and it comes with a whole different set of I guess stress, and so that's separate to the financial aspect of this. What we try and do a lot, and like I was saying before, with our discussions and meetings with these guys every 6 months, is that we know that they are on track and that they are doing everything they can to maximise their outcomes in retirement. We know that because we're meeting with them, and anything that changes in legislation or in their situation, we're wringing every possible dollar of tax savings return, everything out that we can. But it's also, I think, a big relief for them to be able to come in every 6 months, sit down and go, yes, everything's all good, you're on track. That's particularly when people have been, like these guys that have worked in one job for 42 years. It's a massive change to go from, I go to work and I get paid and that's the money that we have to live on, to then go to, okay, well, my retirement savings are working for me and I'm drawing an income out of them. You really want, most people really want the peace of mind of knowing that, number one, that they're doing everything that they can, and number two, someone to tell them that yes, it's fine, you can afford to do this. So what's been really exciting for these guys is in the last sort of year or two, they've started going on a couple of trips overseas and things like that, because they've kind of been able to see that yes, this was where we wanted to be, and we're actually tracking well ahead of that. We can sort of afford to spend a bit more now while we're younger and wanting to go on a few of these trips. Whereas I think if they weren't meeting with us on a regular basis, it'd be very hard to be able to take that extra money and go and spend it on those trips, because they'd be thinking, well, is this too much? Should we be taking less?
Look, I can appreciate that. What if there is a downturn? And you're saying you're not saying if there's a downturn, you're saying when there is a downturn.
Yeah, this is what
you have parked. We have 5 years worth of your income needs in cash, and we've been able to do that because you've been in a better position than normal, or a strong position because of your hard work and our good work. now. So there will be a downturn.
Yeah.
But you've got enough cash in there to give you 5 years worth of income requirements, which is ample time usually for your growth assets to recover.
Yep.
With all due respect, we insist you go on that holiday.
Yeah, that's right.
That you've been mentioning for the last 5 years.
Yes. Yeah.
Go and spend that money.
Yeah. Yeah.
And no one ever comes back after doing that.
Yeah.
Because we virtually have to force some people, don't we?
Some people, yeah.
I mean, everyone comes back, and no one's sorry that they actually spent that money.
Yeah. And that's a good point, because on average, I would say some people need to be loosened, some people need to be tightened. So these guys need to hear, and there are many other people that when they're retired, they need to hear, hey, it'll be fine. You can afford to spend that money. You can afford to do that. Some other people need someone every 6 months saying, don't do that.
Yes.
Stop that.
Yeah,
you
that's
need
right.
to not do that, because you're not in the position that you can afford to do it. So, and that's what we pride ourselves on is that laying down the unvarnished truth of this is the position that you're in. If you make these decisions, this is what the impact of that will be in the future. And so it makes it easy when we've got clients in this situation and who are we're sort of pushing them to go and do the fun things and spend the money. But it's definitely something that our role in other situations can be to sort of be the conscience on the shoulder at times. So you probably can't afford to do that.
Yeah, definitely. Anything else you'd like to add in wrapping up?
No, I think, and I guess the only interesting one that's specific to these guys, so they've been sort of, obviously with our business working with people leading up to retirement, they've probably been some of the earliest retirees. And one of the things that this person has said, which I thought was interesting for people leading up to retirement from the emotional side of things, is that I actually thought he would struggle with not having a job to get up and go and do, and so I asked him, I think it must have been a year or so after they retired, how are you enjoying retirement? And he said, absolutely love it, because a couple of things was that he'd been used to working a lot of shift work, and so he never knew whether he could go to that family barbecue, and it was sort of his life was beholden to his employer and what they needed from him. So he's absolutely loving retirement for that reason. But also the thing that he found that's working really well for him is that he doesn't try and plan 5 years out or worry too much about what am I going to do next week. He used the example, he wakes up in the morning and goes, well, what do I actually feel like doing today? He gets up, goes to the gym, comes home. If the lawn needs to be mowed, he mows the lawn. So it's like he said, if I want a coffee, I have a coffee. If I want to read the paper, I just do that. So I think for most people, the fear of retirement, the emotional side of the fear of retirement is, and we've talked about this in a previous podcast, of what am I going to do all day? And it was interesting to me to hear that you don't necessarily need to have that planned out 5 years out. What am I going to do when I'm 70, or what am I going to do once I'm 3 years into retirement? You can just have faith that it will work out, and that over time you will find things that you enjoy doing and that you want to be doing day to day.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because I mean, traditionally males, especially who have stuck 42 years in one job, have struggled with those types of things.
So no, it's been a really interesting one to watch how these guys have progressed. And like I say, the good thing is that they've put themselves in a position where they have that flexibility. So up until now, they haven't really wanted to do much overseas travel, but now they've decided that they do. But financially, it's a great position for me to be in, to be able to tell them that they are in a position that they can afford to make those choices.
To be able to do that. Great place to wrap up. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Money Over 50 podcast with Lighthouse Financial Advisors. We look forward to catching up again soon.